Hello. Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. We're doing a very special episode that I didn't want to pre-record, wanted to do it live. Canadian elections are coming up. We should talk about it. We won't be doing an episode later today like usually we do. I've been doing 2 a day and it's crazy. But I will be back around the same time tomorrow with the TIR crew, our regularly scheduled time. Also, if you dig this listener-supported programming we have here on TIR, think about becoming a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can make sure TIR can continue this breakneck pace programming. Now, let's talk about why you guys are here. The 2025 Canadian elections. With the federal election set for, Cuba. Monday, April 28th?
That's what the mailer said.
Okay, April 28th. Canada's political trajectory was upended by an extraordinary external shock. For nearly 2 years, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Is that close enough?
It's closer than he deserves.
Okay. Poilievre, whose relentless attacks on Justin Trudeau had capitalized on an affordability crisis, held an insurmountable lead in the polls. Yet when Donald Trump threatened tariffs and even annexation, that 25-point advantage evaporated almost overnight, handing unexpected momentum to the Liberals under incumbent Prime Minister Mark Carney. Canada's election is Carney's to lose in contest turned on its head by Trump. Poilievre's willingness to echo...
We need to come up with a Trump-style nickname for him. I'm thinking Dodgy Pierre.
What's a rude thing to say?
Unlucky Pierre.
Trump would say something super corny like "dirty Frenchman" or something like that.
He's not, and the thing is, he's not even a francophone. He just happens to be called Pierre.
He just happens to have a French name. What would Trump call him?
Apparently, I learned a long time ago that a lucky Pierre is a specific term coming from the homosexual underground. So that may be something to work with.
Lucky Pierre. There we go. Lucky Pierre.
Yeah.
Lucky Pierre's willingness to echo Trumpian populism and his delayed distancing from the former U.S. president not only alienated moderate voters, but also raised urgent questions about sovereignty and the resilience of Canadian democratic institutions. So, who will win in this election for Canada? Will Canada be another place with proto-fascism, or will the Liberals win and Canada gets more of the same? To discuss this with me, as you see, I have a Canadian, Deep State Cuba.
Hello, everyone.
I brought in another Canadian.
Bonjour.
Aminah Sheikh. Sorry. How are you?
I'm good. I really liked your intro.
Because I can't say that French man's name.
No, I love the video in the beginning. Who put that together?
Mean Jean Bajlan put it together, but that is my music.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you recommended that we bring in Raul Burbano, who is a labor organizer, right? Okay, please welcome Raul Burbano. So I'll ask you this first, Cuba, and let you talk with your fellow Canadians about this, because I'm sure you guys have a lot of opinions. But in what ways did Trump's intervention expose structural vulnerabilities in Canada's electoral system?
I think that the electoral system itself is actually proven to be resilient and adaptable in this situation. The British-style Westminster system means that government can call an election, or if it lacks a majority in parliament, then the opposition could bring down a government and force an election. But it's not stuck in the same regular cycle as elections in the United States, which means that, for instance, Mark Carney was able to capitalize on the opportunity presented by this drastic shift in public opinion, this feeling of urgency, and the vulnerability of Lucky Pierre to his association with Donald Trump in this time where Trumpism is extraordinarily unpopular in Canada. And if you're unlucky Pierre, then it might feel quite galling, because you had the prime ministership was yours to lose. You had the opportunity to be the leader of the country. It was all, and now, because ultimately the election cycle is in the hands of the incumbent, you are in a losing position. You're forced to adapt over a very short period of time to a schedule that's thrust upon you. And it looks like fortunes have turned 180 degrees. And instead of a solid conservative majority for Pierre and his party, we're looking at a unprecedented fourth liberal government.
Aminah. Oh, Aminah. Sorry.
Are you calling on me because my name's Aminah?
That's what I said it. You just didn't hear it because I said it.
Well, I think a lot is happening. And I think we do need to understand that the elections that come and go, election cycles come and go. And Canada, similarly to America, the election process is not fully democratic. And what that means is it doesn't really represent the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just like taking time to like absorb what's been going on as a union organizer. And I want to just say that as a union organizer, a large part of our work through unionizing workplaces is establishing a democratic vote, right? And with all the systemic and structural barriers that come with living in a corporate state like Canada and the US, there's just an inability for workers to actually have their voice heard and have their vote be honored. And while union elections are, are suppressed by corporate lobbyists, by employers, similarly, we can see that in federal elections, provincial elections, and general electoralism in Canada. And I think both in all three parties, which we will talk about today, regardless of what the outcome is, we have to understand that millions of people will not be voting. And there's many reasons for that. And and I think that whether the US, whether Trump has weighed in on it, I think that's one aspect of it. And it's interesting to point out, he did kind of endorse the Liberal Party. He said that he doesn't want to work with Polyev. I'm going to say his name differently. No, he doesn't really want to work with Polyev. And I think that makes sense as well. I think that Polyev is more of a wild card, where we have in this country had 10 years of a liberal government. And I think that strategically, it would make sense actually to work with the devil that you know than the devil that you don't know.
You think Trump cares about devils? That's interesting. I mean, seriously, do you think he cares? I mean, that's saying a lot. Do you think he'd rather work with a liberal government other than someone that literally backs what he has to say? Because it seems that all he wants to work with is sycophants. And the liberal government has pushed back.
Why did he say what he said? And that's been sitting with me as well. I'm like, is like having these thoughts like, is he saying this so Polyev wins? I don't know. I've been thinking about it, and my only thought was, we know what the Liberal government record has been economically. We know that they will have diplomacy with the United States. I think that like he would be able to work with them. I don't think he wants to admit that openly, but he basically said, I don't like Polyev.
Mm-hmm.
I that wasn't my interpretation. Having spent a lot of time in Washington and having to work with all kinds of inside the Beltway MAGA people, I would take his statement that he prefers to work with a liberal as a kind of trolling. Trump too, this election cycle, he is dedicated to overturning the apple cart, to sowing chaos, to smashing apart the system, doing things, doing radically new things, and owning the libs all day long. So having a liberal in Canada makes them a better villain for his particular form of right-wing kayfabe inside the United States. Canada is useful to him not as a partner, but as a punching bag. As, oh, it's such a nasty country. They do such terrible things to us. Everyone thinks the Canadians are so sweet, but they're actually really terrible. The tariffs on dairy, all of this kind of stuff. Having somebody pliant in power like Poilievre might make it too easy, might make it too hard to cast the Canadians as villains, because you have a simping yes man, and it's difficult to paint him as this hardcore globalist that that beating up gets you points with your own base.
Raul?
That was an interesting discussion. Absolutely. I think what it's laid bare for us in Canada is that our democratic system and kind of the whole kind of global system is really balancing chaotic, right? So Trump comes in and says we should become the 51st state, has a huge impact on our election. So if we would have been having this discussion 2 months ago, I would have said absolutely, hands down, conservatives, Pierre Poilievre is going to win. Today, with the Trump attacks and the whole back and forth, it's neck and neck. The Liberals are actually in the lead based on current polls by a few points. So it's anybody's a win type of thing. But I do think it shows that we don't have a strong democracy in the sense that our whole electoral cycle now is really based on whatever the U.S. does. If they sneeze, we've got to figure out how we're going to respond, and everything we're doing is really, we're not dealing with the issues that we need here in Canada, like unemployment, inflation, homelessness, the housing crisis. What we're dealing with is how are we going to respond to the economic warfare, right? We call them tariffs, but it's really economic warfare that the U.S. is unleashing on us, and what impact that's going to have. That's really the sole focus in Canada right now, and I think it's unfortunate because it doesn't allow us to deal with the issues, the deep-seated issues we have, the eroding of the social system, the social net, our healthcare system, which are the things that we really need to deal with. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us. On one side, we've seen a growth of Canadian nationalism through this sort of attacks from the U.S. It has its pros and cons, because with Canadian nationalism also comes a lot of racism and xenophobia, and they have to follow lockstep with the U.S. and even the global movement, which is very anti-immigrant, very racist, discriminatory against people from other countries, newcomers. And so, that's one thing. And then on the other hand, it's like, okay, how are we going to protect Canadian industry, right? And what does that mean? And how does that impact people locally? But I do think in terms of the elections, I would just, disagree that right now there is, I think there is a momentum for people to get out because there is a fear of the U.S. So when I looked at Elections Canada's recent election polls, there 7.5 million people have already voted in the pre-elections early voting, which is a 25% increase over the 2021 election. So people have come out on droves, at least for the pre-vote. I'm assuming that that's going to translate as well on the final day on Monday, but one never knows.
It looks like a lot of people. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing. We have to remember that the 2021 election was a very unpopular election, situated in a global pandemic where we had shutdown here. So the numbers will be interesting to me, but I just, as like I said, as an organizer, my focus has always been on mass participation, bringing people to the ballot box, because that's how we win, right? How we win against corporate bosses fight back. And so I do see the mainstream media pushing this idea that people are out there voting, and the definite scaremongering around Trump, which I think is relevant. The only thing I would say is we have to remember that all three parties are pretty unpopular, and there's going to be millions of people that don't vote. And I wouldn't say that's based on apathy, but I would agree with Raul that there is a lot of discontent in this country, like the United States, and people are watching, but I don't know if people are. I know the mainstream media is running all this stuff and this sort of confrontation and rhetoric from Trump around Canada. And now we do see the reaction of Canadian nationalism and chauvinism amongst a certain type of groups of people. But I still don't know what the polls mean, just because that election was a really unpopular election that was quickly pushed, and then it was a liberal government ultimately.
Let me chime in real quickly, because I wanted to look up the numbers and to also balance against expectations here. By American standards, Canadian election turnout is actually quite high. American elections before the entry of Trump, turnout hovered around 50% of registered voters. In the 2021 election, which was lower than the previous two, it was 62.5% of Canadians on the electoral list, our equivalent of registered voters, turned out to vote. That's still just under 10 million people not voting, just because of the population of the country. If 2/3 vote, then that still is a lot of people numerically. So compared to American elections, the turnout is high compared to elections in some other parts of the world where there's a greater sense of civic engagement or stronger institutions, or in Australia, there's a law compelling people to vote. You have to pay a fine if you don't. And there, I would think turnout is around 90%. But I think that I think that we have to be careful about getting too contrarian instinctively about conditions in this election. Just because the mainstream media says that election turnout is high and people are fired up to vote, doesn't mean that's not true. It's possible for them to say a true thing in this particular case. And the reality is that for a lot of normie Canadians, this does feel like an extraordinary situation. It's a little like the Blitz during the World War II, where you have that sense of coming together against a common enemy, against a common threat. And at the back of many Canadians' minds, there's always been this anxiety about what happens if the United States is unfriendly, what happens if they start getting threatening, what do we do? It's something that I think any country that has a much larger, much stronger, much more powerful neighbor always feels subconsciously. But now all of that's out in the open, and the reaction is very strong across the country. And it's true that all three parties are quite unpopular, depending on which segment of the population you ask. There is a great deal of exhaustion with liberal government. It happens whenever a party dominates for too long. Generally speaking, this is why I said that the fourth liberal government would be unprecedented. Generally speaking, after 3 terms, 3 governments, regardless of the performance, objectively, in that period, the Canadian public is usually just sick of your fat, ugly face and wants to give the other flavor, right? Like, they've been drinking Coca-Cola for so long that they're curious about Pepsi again. And Poilievre was going to benefit from that natural cycle, but it is this sense of national threat as well as his embrace of Maple MAGA and Trumpism, trying to bring it to Canada, that has really undermined his chances this time around.
Raul, did you want to respond to that?
No, I do think, I mean, I agree that there is a sense of urgency in Canada. I think that maybe the difference, just in terms from my perspective, is, elections are a cycle, an important cycle in the political electoral platform. But really, in Canada, that's really where the only thing that people do. We don't have strong social movements. By and large, people generally are very politically apathetic. And so this is why we are in the state where we're in, where we become very reactive. So our politics is very reactive right now. It's really just reacting to the U.S. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, it's great that we get numbers go up, for elections, but really beyond that, you don't see people engage. We don't have strong social movement, and that is a big challenge. And that is why we're in the situation we're in.
Well, can I ask two questions? I do want to add. Okay, I'll let you. What do you want to say?
I was gonna say, I didn't know that I was contrarian. I'm not sure if I should be Googling facts right now too. Listen, I just think that it's missing the point. I'm just saying, this isn't Venezuela. Some of us have been to Venezuela, where everybody has a day off and everyone can go vote. And we should think as critical thinkers, and your viewers are very critical thinkers. Why do we live in countries where our government doesn't give us the day off so we can go vote? And that's just my point, right? And I'm talking through the perspective of a union organizer who works in the grassroots with communities on elections all the time. So I'm not looking up information. I'm just going based on my work over the last decade.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as an American, I can say that the majority of the country doesn't vote. The majority of registered voters here don't vote. If they had the day off, they'd barbecue. They're disengaged. So to act as if like Venezuela is a great example, like find a better example.
No, that's my example.
That's not a good one for Western people that are very disengaged from the political kayfabe that we see. What I wanted to ask was, and I think this happened here in 2024 or 2020, and then kind of again in 2024, but mostly 2020, because of that fear of what may happen with someone that's aligned with these U.S. policies that seem ludicrous for me to hear in my 47 years of life. I've never heard a president threaten Canada with anything. I've never really heard them mention Canada as anything but an ally. And even then, it's very rarely mentioned. So to start off by saying Canada is a bad place, number one, and no justification why it's a bad place. It's just a bad place inherently. I don't know why, because there's Indians there. I don't know, like what makes it bad?
Oh, it's simultaneously a bad place, but also very desirable to take over and incorporate.
Yeah, it's bad, but we want this bad. Like I don't get, why you hate it so much. But
we have bad hombres, but we want those hombres.
They're not even really
bad real bad hombres.
Who's the bad hombres in Canada, right? Like I don't know.
Presumably the three of us.
Probably you guys are like the worst. You're all in different provinces too, just to make it
just
even worse.
Spreading it around.
But seriously, I understand, and to say we're going to annex it and make it our own, that's extremely insulting. And it is when stuff gets insulting that people get activated. But I think I feel where you're coming from, Aminah, if the only reason why you're going to vote is because you want to make sure that there's no fascism in your country, you're going to keep these things in effect that were causing the degradation in the first place. Housing isn't going to get better. There's not going to be any rent control. There's not going to be the same amount of programs if they were lacking in the first place, right? So is there going to be structural change with another liberal government? Probably not.
Well, that's for me one of the most remarkable parts of watching the English debate of the party leaders was that even though there was this sense of urgency underlying the entire event, this whole election cycle, the plans presented were all small bore. The issues being brought up, a lot of it actually was kitchen table. How do we handle inflation? How do we handle the cost of housing? These types of real problems that people face. But the thinking behind those solutions was generally, more of the same, but this time with feeling. And I think that there's one, it's a sin to waste a crisis, right? If you have this opportunity, and not just an opportunity, but an obligation, because of the nature of the threat coming from Trump's administration in the United States, then you need to take a structural look at the dependencies of Canada on the United States, the vulnerabilities, both in terms of national security, but also domestically. The Freedom Convoy and the occupation of Ottawa by anti-vax truckers points to the real dislocation and polarization of Canadian society, the fact that there are groups that feel excluded, that have deep-seated grievances. If you just go outside, then it's undeniable that homelessness and drug addiction, public mental health crises are happening all around you. That these are problems that all need to be addressed because they all erode the ability of Canada to sustain itself as a society and as a country. And talking about tweaking taxation arrangements for first-time home buyers is all well and good, but that's not the type of planning. That's not the type of vision that this moment really calls for.
Raul?
I don't think I have too much to say around that. I would just say that you're right. When there is a crisis, there's an opportunity for, I mean, there's obviously a lot of fear, but there's also an opportunity to do things completely different. With Trump attacking sort of the global economic order, I think there is a moment for people potentially, and I'm not sure it's going to happen, but it's nice to think that it might, that the Canadian government, whomever that may be, would come in and look at some of the structural things that need to be changed. But we know that's not going to be the case. We're going to do small tweaks that placate the base, predominantly corporates, whether it's conservatives or liberals. I don't see much of a difference in the platform substantially. So I don't think there's going to be much change. I think we're going to end up continue at any moment when Trump says, okay, let's negotiate and we'll give you this. Canada will kind of bend the knee and just say that we survived, and hopefully you can focus on Mexico and China and leave us alone, right? I think that's really Canada's strategy is deferral. Focus on another country where your friends will continue to be your best friends, and we're not going to make any structural changes until Canadians understand that we've lived under decades under neoliberalism. It's a race to the bottom, workers, housing, environment. We haven't done anything to better that unless there is, we use the terms of revolution or social change or upheaval, whatever that may be. I think we have to go through that first in order to make some massive changes. And I think we can look at, for example, in Canada, the Indigenous movement has kind of led that at the forefront, right? Fighting against extractivism, so, fighting for the environment. Really, they've done that in mass movements in conjunction with other social movements that have supported them, whether it's blocking a critical infrastructure in order to get the government's attention, in order to potentially impact Canadian economy and say, hey, if you don't consult us and we don't give the go ahead on these economic projects, then we can put them to a halt. And that's really what we need is a coordinated effort in Canada where social movements, organizations, progressive organizations come together and force radical change. I don't mean radical in terms of crazy stuff, but I mean just where we prioritize the planet, where we prioritize workers, where we prioritize human needs. And I mean we saw it to some extent during the crisis in 2021 with COVID. I mean, we had been told for decades there's no money for anything, and all of a sudden the government said, "Oh yeah, there is money for corporations. We're going to come out and support." So there is, in a crisis, you can force change, And unfortunately, that's often where it comes, but it comes with a lot of pain, right? Because there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of mass repression, but yet, that potentially can bring change.
Is this a perfect opportunity to organize because so many people are going to the polls and are politically activated by this current situation? Anyone? Anyone?
So I was going to just echo what Raul said about social movements and organizations, because that's the type of work that we both do. We work with trade unions. And I think that, this country over, my experience of organizing indigenous led movements, land defenders, water defenders, climate defenders have united with Palestinian organizers, with the rent strikes, the tenant unions, and labor unions have worked alongside of indigenous organizers and movements to, challenge the government, whatever government it is. So whether it was the liberal government pushing through pipelines, pushing through pipelines and resource extraction. We saw that in British Columbia with Wet'suwet'en territory and the encroachment on their territory and the illegal injunction and the RCMP. We saw that during the pandemic. We saw mass support for them. If the pandemic didn't happen, that could have moved forward in so many different places. We've seen Indigenous land defenders in all the way to the East Coast and Nova Scotia. And I was reading the Yellowhead, which is an Indigenous-led research center and think tank that produces amazing policy. And I think people should really look at it. They looked through Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives' policy, and they did say there is one distinction, even though I'm being harsh on all three parties for reasons. But the distinction is Pierre Poilievre. We can't say his name, and that's okay. It's really hard to say his fake name. I don't know.
Pierre Poutine. Just call him Pierre Poutine. That's
Okay. It's really hard to say his
alliteration. It's
name.
insulting.
It's okay. It's okay that we get it wrong. But he wants to accelerate, much like Trump, he wants to accelerate privatization, deregulation, and many of this extraction obsession, militarism in the Arctic, this and with that has come that chauvinism, that national chauvinism, that we have a right to go into all these places. This is our land. Nobody's there, when actually indigenous communities have been there, and indigenous communities are defending and protecting that land and that air for more moral reasons than corporate greed. So what's worrisome about Poilievre's policies is that he wants to accelerate that, and looking through it, he has made zero regard for the Truth and Reconciliation, missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so I think he comes out of that legacy of Stephen Harper, who was also a very, war hawk, and internally, he was extremely right wing and really cruel to Native communities. And Native communities were at the forefront of fighting against that conservative government. So I think that this is an opportunity for us to keep organizing, as has been happening throughout the pandemic and continues to happen through Palestinian organizers and movements here. And all of them have come together, and there's really allyship and understanding. The last thing I was going to say, there's a real understanding that all of our struggles are interconnected. So Poilievre and the other parties in the debate the other week were trying to say that these are foreign issues. No, you're not going to get away with that. And it's not a foreign issue. And Sanders has tried to say that too. And this is the failure of the so-called left parties. It's not a foreign issue when you're using millions and millions and millions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars to send armament, jet fighter planes, and killing people on the other side of the world with our money. And people have made that connection. And the genocide on Gaza has made it more amplified. And it's really, in this country, it's indigenous communities Palestinian organizers and labor movements, coming slowly behind, but moving this organizing. So I do think that there is hope, and we're going to continue to see that organizing.
So I'm just confused on what the foreign issue is, and what did Bernie Sanders say is a foreign issue?
Okay, so they did this in the debate night the other night too in Canada.
Israel.
They want to say
Israel is
that,
a foreign issue? Okay.
yes, and I think my problem with the dominance of liberal identity politics, just hear me out, is the response from Jagmeet Singh, who's the leader of the NDP, said, well, Canadians really care about issues. They come from different places. No, that's not why we care about it. We care about it because the anti-war movement, Palestinian organizers, Indigenous organizers, and organizers fighting austerity, all the cuts to childcare, education, healthcare, all of that is on the back of ordinary people. But millions and millions and millions of dollars, whether it be through Europe with the war in Ukraine, people were fed up with that already. And actually, why I'm bringing up Bernie Sanders is because I was a Bernie supporter, but I would say what the failure of that the left, I put it in quotes, is that they're not acknowledging, and this is what I'm trying to say. People have been saying this war is unpopular. Like, people are struggling at
Which
home.
war?
Like Raul brought
Ukraine
up.
or Gaza?
Both. And why is it taking RFK, right? Why is it taking Trump to sort of use that rhetoric or like pretend that he cares to bring a ceasefire? I don't know if he genuinely does, but why isn't the left, this is what I'm trying to say, why isn't the NDP saying, or why aren't left parties saying, our constituents are saying they've had enough. Like, this is enough funding. We need two-way arms embargo. Now, we are seeing that come to light, and maybe Raul can speak a little bit about that, but we are seeing the Vote Palestine has made way in this election, which I think is a win. A lot of candidates, Green Party, Liberal, NDP candidates, except the Conservative Party, have signed on to a Vote Palestine pledge, which means two-way embargo and a path towards, ceasefire and peace and stability.
I don't think, did Bernie Sanders say he wants to keep blowing up Gaza, Kuba?
Bernie Sanders, one source of criticism against him on in the sort of especially online left is that he will say things like Hamas is bad and Israel has a right to exist. But I think that he has been extremely critical of the war in Gaza, and I think that there is enough. I consider there to be space for a position like his in I consider that position to be acceptable, right? Like, I don't need Israel to be rolled back, but I do want the fighting in Gaza to end. I want the occupation to end.
I feel like that's kind of across the board, right? Don't most people? I can't speak for I haven't been to Canada since your wedding, but how are Canadians looking at what's going on in Palestine? It's one of those things where when it was first happening, we were getting images through social media and actually seeing in real time, children dying. But like most people, there's only so much you can see before you kind of turn off. So has the turn off happened in Canada?
No, I don't think so. There's in Vancouver before we left, there were quite regular Palestinian solidarity protests, marches. In Europe too, we see signs of pro-Palestinian solidarity everywhere. Graffiti, protests, events, in the media and in real life. And Jagmeet Singh did explicitly call the conflict in Gaza, what Israel was perpetrating in Gaza, to be a genocide, for instance. So I think that has, as Aminah was saying, that it really is a very unpopular war among most Canadians, and the fact that there's any level of support, especially security support for the state of Israel under these circumstances is outrageous for a lot of people. I would say that the situation is significantly different for Ukraine because just like the Gazans are the ones who are being invaded and bombed, it is the Ukrainians who are the victims of Russian aggression in that case. So I think it's absolutely fair to point out the hypocrisy of um, people who back Israel, but also, bleed for Ukraine, right? Like if Ukrainian children being bombed is outrageous, then obviously the same must be true for Palestinians that are being wiped out in this indiscriminate campaign that's openly genocidal on the part of Israel. And I think it's rolling back the deeply entrenched pro-Israel bias that's at the heart of Canadian politics, at the heart of the Canadian establishment, as much as it is in the United States. It's also a huge divide in Europe, where you have governments such as that of Germany that are very out of step with the rest of the population. The government is fiercely pro-Israel. Israel can do no wrong. We need to back them completely. But the public is much more skeptical and eager to distance itself, to disengage from this vicious genocidal conflict that's to which they feel complicit because of that relationship, state to state.
Mhm.
That right now has taken a back seat, I think, in Canadian politics because of the implicit, actually quite explicit threats coming from Washington, D.C. against Canadian sovereignty, against Canadian independence, against the Canadian economy.
Mhm.
And I think that one recent change that I've seen over the past few days in the polling data, and it came out a little in the tone of the debate among the party leaders, is that after the botched rollout of the Trump tariffs, the whole Signalgate issue with Pete Hegseth and the Yemeni war plans being broadcast to Jeffrey Goldberg, all of these own goals, all of this incompetence on the part of the Trump administration, there's a sense that maybe it's not so serious. Maybe these guys, as threatening as they've been, are too clownish and incompetent to actually make good on their plans. And therefore, we could take a bit of a breather. I think that that's very much mistaken. I don't think that there will be an easy path to just deferral to business as usual in the future. The United States under Trump is breaking the entire system that Canada had fit itself into. And there will be some wrenching adjustments that go with that reality, as reluctant as the mainstream parties are to recognize that fact. I was a little disappointed in Carney that he talked a good game about the seriousness of disengaging with the United States, of living with an America that's no longer an unproblematic friend, ally, trading partner, but a potential threat. And now it feels as though he's recalibrated back to business as usual, and that won't be enough. I think that more serious crises are coming down the line, and I would have wanted to see a more ambitious plan on how to prepare Canada for that reality.
Raul?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that international issues historically in Canada, especially during elections, don't uh, don't aren't considered at all. It doesn't really matter. We don't talk about anything international predominantly. It's all focused on local issues. Obviously, the FTA, the free trade agreement, right now is the big issue. But in the end, political. I have less faith in political parties doing anything of substance long term, whichever party gets into power. I think what we need to focus on and what we've seen, and I'm going to kind of point it out to the Palestinian youth movement, it was through their organizing and their work and their efforts that actually kind of changed the dynamic somewhat and have maintained and forced the issue of Palestine and the genocide against Palestinians to the forefront of of the election to some extent. And that's why there's a platform and parties are signing on to it or not. And which is unique for me in Canadian politics, because usually people don't care about, Venezuela, Iran, or that when it comes to the elections. So I think we need to learn from that and keep that momentum where the movements are the ones who are going to force politicians to understand what are the needs and what do we want. Because if we kind of wait for these platforms, which they all sound great on paper, I mean, you could probably take any of them and kind of, they sound very generic to do anything. They're really not going to do much from a substance perspective. They will continue to benefit corporations. They will continue to benefit the 1%. They will continue to benefit multinational corporations, extractive companies. But in the end, we're still going to be in the same situation. There is an opportunity, I think, at this moment where, by and large, the working class have realized, wow, the system which we've had total faith in, which is the neoliberal system, which is the parties, the U.S. as our best ally, that's all gone. Like that sort of has fallen from reality, and there's fear, obviously, to what's there and what does that mean. But within that fear, there is a possibility to galvanize people to build something new. Hopefully, that can be built based on the support of workers, of land defenders, indigenous, Palestinian movements, workers. The labor movement, I think, have to take a much more stronger role in that and continue to push forward. And hopefully, this will galvanize people to continue beyond the election. So the elections will come. We might have a larger voter turnout than usual. That's great, but hopefully that doesn't die on Monday, and then people just continue to organize going forward.
Aminah, you want? I know you have to leave soon. Do you want to say anything in closing?
Well, thank you for having me, and being with the grassroots and with Raul and participating within labor unions. We know that with the rise of fascism, whether it be India or whether it be the United States, we've seen victories. And during the pandemic, we saw like one of the largest mass protest strikes by the farmers, led by peasants, trade unions, workers, united across ethnicity and religion. And they forced Modi, who is a fascist, to repeal really regressive farm laws that would impact the region, would impact them directly, would starve the nation. And I think we should, Iskra books, I'll just plug them there, have a really good book on that event. Even Jacobin said it's one of the largest strikes in the world. So in our present lifetime, we should look at it, and we should look at these victories. We should look at the victories in Latin America with social movements and see how we can learn and we can grow. And I think we do have the ability. And I have learned so much from Indigenous and Palestinian organizers in this country. And I do believe that they will be the leaders in bringing us all together, uniting us, and pushing back, regardless of which government we get.
Kuba, did you want to say something real quick?
Well, I think that one other issue to point out is that there is a sectoral and a regional dimension to all of this. For instance, the heartland of the Conservative Party is Alberta, and more recently Saskatchewan has sort of been folded into it. When you look at maps of voting intentions and polling results, you had this massive red wave across all of Canada, with the exception of Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are going to go heavily, disproportionately to the Conservative Party. And similarly, with the Trump threats, insults, tariffs, the attitude across Canada was one of defiance and resistance, except for the Albertan premier that went down to the United States to talk to Trump. If you find people who are still MAGA maple, they're almost always Albertans. And this is significant for a variety of reasons, partly because that's also the hotbed of the Canadian oil industry. The tar sands are located in Alberta. That's where most of the extraction happens. And Alberta has really been driving the movement to build pipelines and other infrastructures and move this extraordinarily heavy, dirty, polluting oil out to markets through, in the case of British Columbia, some of the most pristine and fragile wilderness in Canada, and some of the most difficult engineering and building conditions through the Rocky Mountains. Now, in this way, the Albertan oil industry captures the profits from this resource extraction, but when there's spills, breakage in the pipeline, as there inevitably is, those losses get socialized, especially onto the backs of British Columbians that have to deal with the fallout, public health, and the destruction of the environment, often disproportionately affecting Indigenous communities in the more remote parts of British Columbia. So if you look at the Canadian political spectrum, right, the most pro-American, most right-wing element is that Albertan-based oil and gas sector. And that funds institutions like the Fraser Foundation that pushes libertarian policy agendas, things like the Polyev platform, which in a lot of ways, shorn of the cultural elements of Project 25, is very similar in its political economy. More privatization, accelerated corporate control, more extraction. Unfortunately, that mantra of more extraction, get the resources out as fast as possible, as quickly as possible, in volumes as large as possible, has become universal across political parties and across the Canadian mainstream, because there's a sense that under these crisis conditions, we need as much money as quickly as possible to reset our economy. We can no longer afford the luxury of caring about the climate or caring about the environment. More pipelines, more extraction. And if there's going to be an oil and gas industry, then, which I feel should be an open question, right? Canada should be more aggressively moving towards renewable sources of energy. It has enough of an innovation base, enough of a tech sector, so that it needn't be locked in to fossil fuels. But if there is to be an oil and gas sector, then whatever is decided under these conditions will be stuck for generations of Canadians. It'll create the pattern and the infrastructure that everyone will have to live with for decades to come. So I have this anxiety that whatever party,
Oh no.
there'll be more of a need for land defenders and for an aggressive protest movement against ecological abuse and against giveaways to the fossil fuels industry. That movement will be more necessary than ever.
Raul, you're muted, Raul.
I think that's a great point in terms of what Kuba was just saying, in terms of one of the biggest losers we're going to see in terms of what's happening globally right now, especially within Canada and the US, is the environment, right? So the move to protect the environment, to reduce fossil fuels, it becomes less. And so the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, probably more, whoever gets elected, it's going to be a rush to extractivism, right? So Canada is already the giant of extractivism. 75% of mining companies are headquartered in Canada. That's not a coincidence. We make billions of dollars off it. We're experts. We profit. We exploit communities all in the global south, indigenous, whatever may be, in order to take the resources. And so in Canada, what that means is, Canada will undermine its commitments to the United Nations under, for example, the Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, who have the right to consent to any kind of resource extraction. So to be consulted and consent, and even say no, that's going to go by the wayside, which means Indigenous communities will land defenders, environmentalists will rise up and stand forward to protect, and then they're going to be criminalized. And so we're going to see a lot more violence from that perspective. I think within Canada against environmental movement, indigenous movement, the youth movement, who are very aligned with environmental movement. And I think that's what we're going to see, whichever party gets into power, because of the kind of economic warfare that we have right now with the U.S.
Well, it's election time in Canada. Monday is the big day. When will they have the final results? When will you guys know?
They usually have them by, in the evening, and probably a little bit later, but they usually will have them by the end of the night. So
I know there's a
should
lot
have-
of votes that are in already.
Yeah, early voting was in, so there was about 7.3 million votes that were in for pre. But I mean, we should have results. We usually have them, early in the morning on Tuesday. So I think we'll know relatively fast. I mean, we do have a manual system, so it's all like everybody's just paper
Yeah.
ballots, which is a bit absurd if you ask me, for a country in the north. But
Well, I find it actually quite reassuring that it's still paper ballots, because the electronic voting systems, they're just begging to be hacked. Eventually, Elon Musk's AI will tell you ahead of time who won the election. Um, I think that because it's a parliamentary system and it goes riding by riding, unless the majority ends up being super, super small, and so the few outlier districts that are very, very close and need recounts to establish who won, unless that happens, who's going to form the next government, even if a few ridings are still counting ballots deep into the night.
Well, good luck to you, Canada, in your elections.
thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure, Jason.
Raul,
Thanks,
thank
Kuba.
you for joining us. Also,
Thank you, Raul. Yeah, great talking.
And I'll see most of you people on Saturday morning, where I just will never get to sleep in. Because what's that?
The price of
What's-
virtue.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'll tell myself. Someone says pray for the NDP. We didn't even get a chance to talk about the NDP fully in this. Do they
nice.
play a significant role in your opinion?
Do you want to go, Kuba? If not, I can say a few things.
Please go ahead.
So, I mean, in these elections, obviously the NDP is supposed to be the most leftist party, and they usually, in the last few elections, they've been outgunned by the Liberals, who have campaigned to the left of them, and the NDP is kind of stuck trying to be middle of the road. The challenge, I think, from my perspective in the NDP, there are two. One is, I think, Canada is still a racist, deeply racist state, and I don't think that, and just in talking to people, that we could accept a man with a turban, a brown man, as prime minister. So I think that's one underlining fact. Two is that the NDP has been maligned for decades as communist, and if they were to get into power, they would nationalize your home type of thing. And there's a fear. There's definitely a fear monger of the NDP. And third, the NDP just hasn't helped themselves, because their policies they're trying so desperate to get elected that they don't really cater to their base. They'll do anything. They'll say anything to get elected. And people kind of read through that and they're like, you know what? You don't really stand for anything. And so once in a while, I mean, even in the last couple of years, with the Liberals, the NDP has propped up the Liberal government, who's been the most unsupportive and unhappy government that we've seen in a long time. So it's hard for people to vote for the NDP based on their own track record, but also based, I think, on the context that I added.
Well, I would vote for Jagmeet Singh just for the fact that when that dude tried to punk him, was it a couple of years ago? Year ago, where he was trying to fight him? I was like, that's who you want as president. What? Say it to my face. What? That's what I thought.
And he's a black belt, I think, in Taekwondo or something. He's tough. He grew up scrapping. He's a scrapper. So he beat the hell out of anybody.
That's what's funny about that. That's the guy that people think Donald Trump is.
No.
Right? He's never. Right? He got shot at, and everybody thought he was the Superman, but someone actually walked up to Jagmeet Singh when he was walking with what looked like a child in a suit, and was ready. He wanted all the smoke.
Oh yeah. I think
Oh.
him and Putin would be a good fight, right?
Yeah.
They would, like, him and Trump wouldn't be a fight. Like, he would just, like,
No.
like,
He'd be
but him
just-
and Putin might be like, might be
No,
worth paying
I
for
want
that.
to get Jean Chrétien in his prime in the mix of this,
Oh.
right? The Jean Chrétien was like our Bush era prime minister, and he introduced the Shawinigan handshake to Canadians, which is when you grab paparazzo by the throat and you lift him up and to choke him.
Yeah, he did that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know if it was the guy like kept taking pictures or there was another photographer there as well, but there's an amazing picture of him. Like he's wearing dark sunglasses, and you can see him with his hands around the guy's throat. Yeah. Yeah, that Chrétien versus Singh, you know?
Yeah.
Isn't that what people like? What's the guy's name? I want to say Glenn Ford, but it was something Ford. In
Doug Ford?
Doug Ford.
Doug Ford, the one that was smoking crack.
Doug Ford is the one that's there now. It's Rob Ford
Rob
was
Ford,
the
was
crack smoking
guy.
mayor. Yeah.
Yeah.
People love quote unquote authenticity to a fault. We have to always keep that in mind. People love authenticity to a fault. Thank you guys. I love these Canada shows because I've been there a lot. I kind of dig it. You know, I had our off-air conversation about my time in Canada. One of my favorite breakfast restaurants in North America is in Canada.
Wow. Which one?
I don't want to say, but Cuba knows it. It's in. Is it in the east side of Vancouver? It's the east side, right? Cuba.
Yeah, I think it's on like Commercial Main area.
I know the last time we were on tour. This is how much I like it, Raul. I don't know my way around a lot of places, but I've been around the North America, no bullshit, probably 50 times. Just constant loops. And we were on tour in Vancouver and we found that place without navigation. They have a breakfast there that's like $2.99.
Oh wow.
And when you're poor, it's like it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So keep Canada free for that alone.
Unlimited maple syrup on your pancakes.
Straight from the tree.
That's right.
Well, thank you guys. Have a good rest of your day and weekend. Cuba, I'll see you soon. And we are out.